Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us from. It's such a privilege for us to be with you today, and you to be with us too. My name's Ed Stevenette from the Learning Planet Alliance team, calling you from Paris today. We are midway through our week of the Learning Planet Festival, which is this kind of crazy roller coaster of around 600 events around the world, looking at celebrating learning to take care of oneself, others, and the planet. Throughout this week, we've got events looking at and discussions looking at imagination and how it cuts through and connects to really learning and celebrating taking care of oneself, others, and the planet. We've already had two this week, looking at educating at the margins and imagining as well for peace building. And now it's really just a privilege and honor today to be able to join this conversation, looking at connecting imagination, wisdom and science in the imagination. So I'll give the floor first to Steph before we pass on to the speakers. My wonderful co-host, tell us a bit about yourself, Steph.
Thanks, Ed. It's great to be here. Our third trip around the sun, I think, with Learning Planet. Yeah, I'm the Vice Chancellor of Imagination University. I've been with AIME for about 6 years and Vice Chancellor for the last one. I'm really excited to jump into the conversations today. Over the last year, I've been meeting and connecting with ambassadors, people from all over the globe that have come together to join the uni, forming this relational network that activates intelligence from inside, outside the margins, to merge it all together to design systems. And my perspectives have grown immensely, and I've learned so much from them. And even with all that learning, like talking about imagination, really pushes the boundaries on my understanding of the world. It's almost like I can kind of grasp some things and things kind of sequence up and then it almost disappears. So I'm really excited to dive in and peek behind all the layers and poke into all the corners and talk a bit more about imagination. So over to me to introduce the video. We are going to, before we meet our panel and our speakers today, we're going to have a look at some highlights from our last Imagination Circle on the power of imagination.
Humanity is facing a number of different pressure points where we actually need imaginative thinking.
We have 7 billion imaginations, and this is what will give us hope for a better world, for sure.
The starting point to imagine an alternative future is to realize that the only thing that travels faster than light is imagination.
Let's start by imagining together what makes us human. How do we create the conditions to express our humanity?
Imagination is a key kind of part of the route to empathy, and also to find ways to engage with the sublime.
It's about understanding imagination as the key to so many different doors.
Over the past centuries, in my early years, I notably experienced life as an artist, a prisoner, a Buddhist monk, a junkie, a genius, a poetess, an assassin, a mother, and even a rabbit. This was pretty stimulating. I would love for all kids to experience as many lives as possible.
I am 17 years old. Sometimes I myself wish that I had the imagination of a small child. A child does not think too much about the hardships of life, but rather build a world that he or she wants to see.
How do we imagine the best way to foster imagination?
It's really a fundamental concept for us as humans to have imagination. Imagination plays a really important role in how we look at the world and how we build our own future as well.
What is that possible future where all of our societies can live peacefully? And what do we need to learn to actually become that kind of species that doesn't require violence to evolve? Can that be one of key contributions of our imagination capacity
that imaginative capacity to wander yourself into a path, and then the energy to move is something that's critical.
The unexpected can come out, and what do we do to enable that to happen?
Imagination in its simplest forms is playing with possibility.
Let us imagine education as a big puzzle, and each of us have different pieces of that puzzle. So if we connect all people together and they can share their puzzle pieces, and then we can solve the whole puzzle.
Allow them to really imagine what they can do for a better world and for a better future. That really allows them to take action, and that action gives them hope for the future. We're all about ensuring that every single person really is able to chart their own path of success.
If you redefine and reimagine the idea of success to be thriving, then every child has the ability and the potential to succeed in their own way, because they define their own success.
What comes with imagination is ultimately creativity, and with that fear, there's something so truly transformative about being able to express ourselves deeply.
It's in those moments of stillness, when we reconnect with our most innermost feelings, is where imagination gets activated.
You've seen already, we've been blessed to have some amazing voices, experts, wisdom coming from around the world, looking at how we're connecting imagination to change and to responding to challenges in the world. And this is no different today. Today it's going to be an open conversation. We're hearing from those who are at the intersection of wisdom and scientific traditions on how we build unlikely meaningful connections in communities from the bottom up. So whether that's through mentoring, open knowledge labs, extreme citizen science, this conversation really explores and connects different approaches to bringing wisdom and science together for community development. And so it's really going to be very, very open. Don't hesitate to put your questions, comments as well in the YouTube chat, and we'll definitely try to get back to you and bring that in as well. But in order to get started off, maybe I give the floor first to yourself, Muki, to share, where does imagination come in for you in your work, particularly looking at extreme citizen science?
Thank you, Ed, and welcome everyone to the session. It's interesting to think about what is the area that I'm operating. I've been in the past 20 years thinking about how we open up science so it's a very as a very effective form of human knowledge. It needs to be applied and used by different communities, and especially marginalized communities. And if we think about non-literate and illiterate communities, can benefit from the application of science. So how can we develop the tools, the techniques, the methodologies and approaches that will allow any community, regardless of literacy, to find ways in which science and scientific techniques can use to understand and solve the problem that matter to them. And over those 15 years, we worked with, hunter-gatherer groups in the Congo Basin, also in Namibia, in Brazil, and in other places, and slowly, together with them, co-created new ways of producing knowledge in a way that can be used for protecting resources that are important from logging, dealing with some cases of illegal poaching, creating relationship between them and EcoGuard, which otherwise there is a lot of issues of harassment and human rights abuse that are happening, and so on. So it's this concept of let's find ways to co-create knowledge in a way that it's acceptable, and we appreciate anyone who is producing the knowledge that open up opportunities and create new ways of doing science, which is done together with everyone. And that's what this concept of extreme citizen science is trying to say.
Thanks for that intro, Muki. Sounds like it's very emergent, and it's become it's a way for those communities that are uncovering like this knowledge through scientific processes, whether they can read or understand the language that it's brought forward in, to make it relevant to their communities. So really keen to dig into that a little bit further. We also have Illa from YouthxYouth joining us. Welcome to the show. Good to have you here. Would you like to give the audience an intro and tell us a little bit about how imagination is merging into or how you use imagination in the work that you are involved in?
Yeah, thanks, Steph. So YouthxYouth is a global community of young people, young education activists, united with adult allies in an intergenerational, intercultural, genuinely global kind of relationship, a big like ball of beautiful relationships. And we are really, imagination is a third of our pedagogy. It's really an essential tenet to everything that we do. And yeah, I think I'd bring in just one of the ways that we do this, which is by asking the question, what if? And it's in some ways, it's such a simple question. And it's also this question that opens up, kind of like Muki, pointed to this idea of creating our own knowledge, new forms of knowledge. And when we ask what if, and we dare to imagine how the world could be, then we start to see things that weren't possible before. And we believe that allowing young people, specifically marginalized young people, the majority of our community is found in the global South, or are from global majority backgrounds in some way. We allow a liberation of not only ourselves and our collective being, but the systems that we'd hope would serve us. And we move beyond simply critiquing what is, which is incredibly valuable too, to the full imagination and implementation of what could be. And that's what we support young people to do. We support young people to launch their own projects, to do this in ways that are intergenerational, to collectively envision together. And so we have our Global Learning Festival, which is actually starting today, and is gathered around this inquiry of what do we need to learn, be, and do to create the world of our deepest longing. And that deepest longing, that's our imagination, that's our intuition. That's what we know on levels that we can't maybe even express in words, but we know in a felt sense, of what the world could be and who we could be. So thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
Congratulations on the launch of the festival, first day. I think that's such a powerful question, that what if, like, it starts to cast all these visions, and when you match that with the action of doing, I think for me at least, like, it really aligns a lot with Imagination Uni. They do action projects, cast the visions, and then connect relationally. And I think along the way you get a view of those systems, right? And you have to you uncover like all of these barriers that you need to either remove, go over, under, like any way that you can to create, to bring your vision to life. And I think one of the most tormenting things could be you have a vision or a dream that can never be fulfilled. So it's amazing that you're doing this work with a variety of people from society to merge all of that intelligence together. And we have John Davis joining us today as well. Would you like to introduce yourself and give us a little bit of an overview how imagination intersects in all the work that you're involved in at the moment?
Gary, thanks, Steph, and thanks, panel, for introducing. Gary's is our old country way of speaking. It means hello country, how are you, who are you? And we're basically doing that now, which is deadly. I'm involved in Indigenous Knowledge System Lab, which is a collaborative of Indigenous lead thinkers, Australian Indigenous lead thinkers, around our 60,000-year-old campfires. And we're blessed to come together to be able to like forge that thinking around the premise of how can our thinking save the world. So there's definitely a lot of interconnects with who's on the yarns today, and it's a really good space to be in to share those like conversations. What I want to do is to, in relation to translation, I normally sing. I'm a singer of country and a storyteller of country. Some of the oldest songlines and storylines in human history. We talk about imagination, but I wanted to share a translation. And one of our challenges, especially when we're based in the university, dysphoria, and then obviously imagination's challenge, AIME's challenge, which we're a key partner. I've definitely seen that out. Is that we're blessed to have J&B as a founding adjunct as part of our lab circles and collaborations. But one of our challenges, all of us, and I've heard it already, is the translations piece, the translations for our communities. And in Australia, where I'm from, we're one of the most marginalised, as Steph can attest, peoples on the planet. And we're also one of the most researched. And yet in this space, there is this massive gap between what data is achieved and the social determinants of health and well-being outcomes, education. Yet we are the most researched people on the planet. So then the question then is research for who and whom? So what I wanted to kick off, Steph and Edward, was just a poem that I think translates across to everyone, but it's about that campfire. And we say Gunju. Gunju's our campfire, and we're looking for Dummage, the good smoke. So if you just bear with me while I get that poem, and we'll sing it out as we set circle. And as you close down many screens, Steph, give us a thumbs up. You can still hear me.
Yeah, got you. Happy to wait for a poem any day.
Poem is Bian Bian. Bian Bian is my language, means dream. Damanyanyong, damanyanyong. Bianga, bianga. Look and can't see. Hear and no noise. Taste and no flavor. Smell and can't breathe. Stop. Bianga. Feel tingling slow time. Smoke. Eyes are like Nile. Eagle. Bina like Guruman. Kangaroo. Mouth like Yagara. Goanna. Nose like Barunga. Rat kangaroo. Bandicoot. Kujumba. Damanj. Yangyong. Being, when we're doing translation, is about talking about those dreams. And imagination is about dreaming for us and for me. And Damanj is a landform jar of seeing those dreams, the smoke around the fire. So as we come around our fires here, very keen to tune in to what those yarns are, Bianga, but I'm also keen to share the way we look at empowering our First Nations people, because our Indigenous people, the oldest living surviving cultures, the first bakers, makers, creators, we are Indigenous science. And it's something that, an important piece that the Knowledge Lab likes to continue to push into the field, the notion of real equity and balance, because we're talking about our knowledges, no matter if we're in Africa, Australia, America, Central America, everywhere in the world, that Indigenous knowledge is some of the deepest and the oldest connected in the planet. Yo, thank you, Gambadindus.
Thank you so much for that, John. I'm an avid listener of the podcast, the others, all of the yarns coming out of the Deakin Knowledge Lab. And, you know, I grew up being very ashamed of being Indigenous. There are a lot of narratives that were told to me about who I was. And over the last couple of years, I've really just started to uncover what it actually means to me, and finding so much value in being Indigenous Australian from all of these yarns. And I feel like, you know, there's so much in there through the way that we passed on the story. We taught, there was like different ceremonies for different times of the year, and following like the song lines in the lands and recognizing the patterns is, you know, we had an understanding of the way the world works. And if we're at this intersection now in humanity where we don't know how to reverse climate change, there are, I think, lessons that we can learn from with Indigenous knowledges everywhere as a gift to bring forward. So yeah, thanks so much for joining and just being involved in the labs in general and bringing this knowledge to the forefront for so many people. We also have Pearl joining us today as well. Would you like to take yourself off mute and give everyone watching an intro to yourself and a little bit of a recap on how Imagination's fusing into all the work that you're doing?
Sure. Hello again to the panel members, the host, and everyone streaming in from YouTube. My name is Paul, and I'm from South Africa. I think I'm literally at the crux of the intersection in terms of implementing and living between wisdom, science, and using imagination to spur on all of that. And an apt way to actually introduce it is to start with myself and to actually mention how I fit into these different categories. So I'd say that I'm an onion, and not because I make people cry, but because of its multi-layered characteristics that it has, because of the multiple professional caps that I wear and my very vast interest range. On paper, I'm a medical and forensic scientist, so that's where the science aspect comes in. But over the recent years, what I've realized is that my passion to serve is more geared towards the space of education, and particularly reducing education inequity in my country and globally, but promoting youth development in the process. And that's the driving force behind the initiative, which was co-founded during COVID, called my blog Politas of Wisdom, hence the wisdom aspect. And this was co-founded by me and my dear friend, who's also another scientist. And the team that we have right now are just scientists, coincidentally enough. And we sort of look at our own experiences as well as experiences of younger members today, of what do they experience as the biggest gap in terms of education and their future. So what we tended to do is look at these key areas of social issues and summarize it into 3 categories. So that being attaining wisdom, 1, youth empowerment, 2, and accessing local and global opportunities. So how that meshes in and works with the blog is that our blog is broken down into 3 components as well. So the first being the blog component, under the category of attaining wisdom. So these are actually literary pieces in terms of storytelling, which inspires and motivates people and supports their personal and mental development. The second part being our podcast, which we have, and this is in twofold as well. So the first being, so this is under the category of youth empowerment. So the first aspect is we get to interview and have conversations and dialogues with an array of people, from people who are homeless on the streets because we believe that they have golden nuggets to share and that their stories need to be heard as well, from local entrepreneurs, those that are doing immense or amazing impacts in their communities, and we just want that platform to give them that platform to encourage and inspire other people. The second part to that is we co-created with the youth of our community. So for example, we host local competitions. The last one we did was the podcast jingle competition. So we wanted a really cool music intro for our podcast, and we created a competition for that. And that aspect is just basically to give the youth a platform to showcase their local artistry and talents, because they don't really have that in the circumstances in which they come from. And then the last category, which is access to local and global opportunities. So this is twofold as well. The first being that we see the youth in our community don't really know how to access funding to supplement their studies or even go to school. So that's a major issue. And I know myself, when I finished school, as well as when I went into university, I didn't know. So what we tend to do is we source out and verify scholarships, fellowships, and learnerships, and we put it onto our blog component so that it's a one-stop place where people can get information from. And then the second component to that is we've seen the need for the intersectionality between pedagogy and andragogy as well, because we see that not only the youth, but adults as well, they don't have a lot of skill in beneficial aspects in terms of work readiness. So we do free CV consultations and job skills workshops biannually, just to develop them in that. So yeah, there's a lot of imagination involved in terms of storytelling, how we see, look, and want the blog to come across in terms of relatability, and also have both the youth and adults of our community to think differently think of a nation, think of a world where they don't have to succumb to the circumstances because they're more than what other people make them out to be.
Thanks so much, Pearl. And I think what you share, it brings up, I think, what's been mentioned as well in by the speakers as well, around not just the intersectionality, but the intergenerational importance of these conversations as well. And maybe we'll be able to open up and have a think about that in the second part of the session. Just before we do that, want to share a short video from the esteemed professors at AIME. And just as a bit of a disclaimer, these professors are puppets, and who are most qualified in the world to teach how to build a fairer world? Well, when we dig below the surface, we see puppets as the ones to teach us, remove our cloaks, our identities that can be sources of strength and division, and transcend into the world of imagination, into the essence of the idea and imagining what is possible. So we'll pass over to the puppets for a quick video before we get over to questions.
Einstein and I were discussing the crossover between wisdom and science, and whether wisdom is in opposition to science, and what is wisdom, scientific wisdom or traditional wisdom? I mean, how do we clarify that? How do we define it? Wisdom, science, science, wisdom, science.
Yeah, well, I think part of it is we have to slow down time. So we it's like we're all just falling. Slow motion, everybody. And then as we're falling, we breathe.
Breathe it in.
And as we're slowing down time, we don't fight the thoughts. We don't muscle the thoughts. The intelligence is already mapped. Scientific, systematic. Breathe and let it come.
Sounds good.
Yep, I think that's about it.
Love it.
It's great to hear from professors, my bosses actually at the university. Thank you for that intro into the vid ed. I might throw to you, John, to kick us off, and just want to get your thoughts around that piece of slowing down time that Professor mentioned, and that we have the wisdom and the knowledge there. For me, it kind of brings forward the need to let go of some of the kind of control and metrics and things that we have in place, but keen to hear your thought on it.
Well, thanks, Steph, and our deadly non-human professors, deadly weave in there. I could see Wyden too. The platypus has come through a few of our yarns, a very superhuman species in Australia, the platypi, the echidna, amazing animals. Steph, I guess if the notion of applying our wisdoms and thoughts, if I could just sing out, the Bianga piece was a part of that when I was reading earlier about beyond the dreams. Like if you're not tuned in, if you're not taking the time just to stop and listen and be, then you're going to miss the opportunity for that relational weave. And I think one thing I picked up from our colleagues on panel already is that notion of taking that time, making sure there's that human-to-human contact, and also making space. Because one thing I know, we did a prelim here for our yarns here. Edward cut me out on a few of them. Nah, that's a joke. Oh, nah is a very Australian way of saying, hey, just gammon, just joking. But our mob too, our Indigenous mob, and Herman and Co can attest, we use a lot of silences in the way we speak as well. And we're not always communicating through the verbal. So if you don't take the time to sit and listen and be, then you're not getting a sense. And that's what Bianga is about back on Bunya country. And Bunya, for those who don't know, is one of the oldest trees of exchange in Australia. So the Bunya was exchanged in a 3-year harvest. This is the bumper crop for our mob to share in the summer seasons with the winter, the fish on the East Coast. And when we get ourselves out of those rhythms, that's when we lose the opportunity to not just sustain, but what we say in the lab, to regenerate. Regeneration is what our was what our world and what definitely Australia needs in its pattern and thinking and doing. So be in that time slow, Bianga, sit and think, be in time. It's a really important piece. And a major part of that is that relating. Yeah. That answers part of your question, Steph.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm saying, we work a lot with emergence, and a year ago I was like Googling what it was, and it's one of the biggest questions also like in the universe. But I think when that piece with listening, like it's not only, I guess, humans that we have to listen to. We're really focused on humans at the moment, but there's a lot of other things that we're connected to that we need to understand the language of the trees, of the fish, of the oceans, like all of these things. And how do we do that if we don't take an observatory kind of role to pick up those patterns and hear what it is, the messages that they're telling us? And throughout emergence of knowledge, there's so many things that can come through, right? And maybe that's the piece where imagination kind of fits in some way. Like I said at the beginning, I kind of have a concept and little graphs of things kind of sequencing up, and then they kind of vanish as well. So thanks for that offering, John. Let's go over to Illa. And do you want to give us your perspective on imagination, how it kind of feeds into the work that you're doing, and some of these outcomes that you're seeing with that intergenerational piece of people collaborating together to generate knowledge or new knowledge is anything ever new as well? That's another question that I have. Are we just reconnecting to what's always been there?
I think that's an important question, and I don't have a certain answer for that, and I think that's good. But it's a live thread for me, this question of like, what is newness as well? What is the chasing of new? Why? Why do we do that? And I wanted to touch on something that you just mentioned, Steph, and also the professor mentioned about that when we slow down, and this is what John was talking about, that wisdom is there. And that wisdom is there in the more than human world around us and in the puppets, and it's there in our bodies. And our bodies are the body of the earth, and the body that, that's our connecting force to this land that we live on, this is me as well. This is what I think. But that we at Youth by Youth, we do a lot that's about recovering lost abilities that we've always had, and we've been told by the education system, like, oh, you don't need that. Don't worry about using your imagination. Don't worry about, we'll talk about critical thinking, but at least in my country, in the UK, like, we won't teach you how to critically think. We'll teach you how to memorize and regurgitate. And so a big question that we are asking at Youth by Youth is like, who is our education serving? Who is this for? And rather than just training young people to like get in there and identify the problem and solve it, we're like, whoa, okay, where are you putting your energy? Like, let's sit down and think and be and feel into our deepest longings and our imaginings of what education could be, and let's place our energy there. Let's place our attention on this act of creation, on this act of weaving. Actually, that's exactly how we describe it, is weaving together this new world. And our kind of trajectory is towards that world of plurality, a world where many worlds exist. And that's again the point about centering the margins, that we cannot do that if we aren't centering those who have been pushed aside, and recovering that wisdom, reclaiming our education.
Wonderful, thank you. Sorry, Ed. I did say strategy for the next question, but I see that Pearl has a hand up to have a response or a question to add in.
Yeah, I actually want to backtrack to the first question that you posed to John as well, because I really like that question. And it actually is very apt because I'm reading this book called The Things You Can See Only When You Slow Down. I don't know if you can see that, but it's by a Korean author. And it makes so much of sense because if you think about how advanced our world is becoming, we're always on this rat race and it's so fast paced, we don't even have time to actually pause and actually appreciate the little things in life anymore. There's a lot of things that are lost along the way. From what John was saying about indigenous knowledge systems, respect, appreciation of nature itself, because remember that we are, like Ida said, we are still part of the earth, right? So we've lost that sort of interconnectedness with everything. And I think when we pause and take that time to breathe, it would be amazing if we did that each day. We feel very grounded in terms of what we're doing, our life's purpose, our mission, where we need to move forward, how to move forward. And this basically allows us to have different perspectives on the bigger questions in life. And I think at first it starts with us, because when we take that moment to take that time, we also self-regulate. And we become very self-aware, which makes us more social aware. And we can also communicate across loads of barriers and limiting beliefs, which also widens the space for imagination. And I want to come back to the point of what Ila was saying about the current education system being a sort of mechanism or system where they teach cognitive abilities and we just have to regurgitate all the time. And that's true, and it's seen very widely. And if you had to tell somebody, like, how would you see imagination? They would tell you that it's an abstract notion comprising of thoughts, ideas, fantasy, and maybe even a sense of virtual reality for a person to sort of have like a mental or virtual recluse. But in essence, it's actually very intertwined with the reality that we're facing today. So when a person uses their imagination, they're actually using their collective wisdom and their set of skills, their learnings, experiences, to transform the reality that is existing into a reality that one feels safe, connected, valid, peace, and also healthy. Because everyone wants a healthy state of mind, which nourishes your healthy body and stuff. So I think taking that time to slow down is so existential for us in terms of also connecting and reevaluating how we see things.
Thanks so much, Pearl. And I see, John, as you mentioned in the chat, we need education that regenerates knowledge and not just regurgitates it. There was a question that to pass on to the panel, and I might pause, but I will give it to you, Muki. But just as prior to doing that, one that came across is how might we pass knowledge across thought systems? Where does the co-design, mentoring, storytelling come in? That might have prompted your hand up, but you don't need to answer that straight away. Up to you, Muki. Go for it.
Yeah, it's interesting that I had thought about that from what John and Eli and Phil were just expressing. And that's actually quite fundamental to the way that I approach the whole issue. So also the professors and their point about science and wisdom. So we have to accept that science is a very powerful form of knowledge. It's changing the world, and it's changing the world forcefully. At the same time, it's reductionist and it doesn't notice what it's doing around. So as something that is extremely powerful, it needs to be extremely humble. And one way to kind of force it to be humble is to bring it into interaction with other knowledge systems. So to kind of accept that it's the, in some situation, it's the least worth form of human knowledge that we created. But in order to function properly in society, it needs to be this humbleness towards other forms, to accept that other ways of understanding the world and knowing the world exist from religion, from indigenous knowledge, from traditional knowledge, from people who are living in an area. Anyone, it's not just relevant for people in the margins of the system, but also to think about people who are living in a neighborhood or in a village where they have a lot of knowledge that they built about their environment and about how this thing is working, and not to jump in and kind of tell them what should be their life or how we should solve problems using just scientific method. So this ability to kind of do citizen science and discuss with communities together and identify what types of knowledge should be collected, what type of knowledge should be discussed, and what types of knowledge should be used to solve the problem is a way to slow down, because it forces this discourse and debate and discursive approach. But we, at all times, and I'll repeat about that, is that as the most powerful actor in the room, it's science and scientists that have to have the obligation to know that they need the humbleness when they are approaching other forms.
Thanks so much, Muki, and it's I'm loving this focus on time in the conversation and giving time and giving space. Steph, you had a question that you wanted to pass on as well.
Yeah, I do. I've got a couple of kind of threads like floating around with the word interconnectedness being brought up, and the assumption that maybe we're not like part of that patterning that we're in is broken, but I think it's just unhealthy in some ways. So for me, one of my big kind of learnings and revelations is that the universe is interconnected, whether we see it or not. It's just the way that everything is networked. And like, I quite enjoy kind of writing the layers between different things. Like I do quite a bit of meditation and think about the sun's energy like coming into me, and then energy going into the ground through my feet. And then I listened to some of the podcasts and read the peer review that came out of Deacon's lab, and there's a lot of talk about the smoke and the fire and stored energy as well. And I think, for me, I see sun as a ball of fire, and we know what the trees do with the sun, turn that into oxygen. And then when we burn trees and leaves, it almost turns back into this ball of fire. So is that like little suns? And I think like there's so many different layers and levels in between. So if we accept that we are interconnected, and just some of the ways that we're communicating and story keeps coming through as this big kind of narrative of like, it's the only story is narrative. Story for me is like, I feel like it's the only thing that we have that creates everything. We're all the co-authors. So if we're patterned in a certain way to think in very linear ways, and we don't get this opportunity to be like the onion layers, we don't have all of these perspectives to draw from. What is it that we can do to make those relationships between us for the communication? And I think that's another part of it as well, is we're not taught how to communicate and see through all these different lenses. It's very singular focused. So what is it that we need to do to build that up? And it's a hard space to go into as well, that shift in the mindset to see things complex. So yeah, just that question, like what are some of the things that we could be looking at as those solutions to repattern our connections to each other, everything around us, to have that communication flow and pass on the notes, where we're generating this knowledge, we're regenerating, how are we passing that on to each other, and also everything around us in a flow state. Anyone like open to jump in, build on, or ask some more questions off the back of it as well?
Oh, go for it.
I was actually typing my response in the chat, but I'm going to read it out anyway. So I love the fact that you were speaking about energy and energy transformation, Steph. And I believe that like all organisms on Earth embody or are energy entities. And it makes me think about the law of conservation of energy coming from the science part of it, in which it states, and I could be mistaken because it's been a while, but it states that energy cannot be created or destroyed, but can only be transformed from one thing to another. And I think that as human beings and as creatures of a diverse and bigger ecosystem, there was one quote that was said earlier in the Learning Planet Festival, where ecosystems allow ecosystems to grow. And that is the transferal of that energy, but energy in terms of how do we treat other people? How are we responding to nature? How are we responding to negativity, positivity, the law of attraction even? And it opens up a space for us actually putting aside that ego and pride as being the dominant species in our own ecosystems as humans, thinking that we have this wide and dominant like cognitive ability, but also assessing how can the other creatures within our ecosystem also help and guide us into where we want to go as well. So yeah, it's been lovely that you mentioned that whole aspect.
Wonderful. Feel free to jump in, John.
Deadly Pearl, thank you for weaving those responses. Actually, I was going to check in before Ayan was Urban. Did you have anything to weave in? Because I do have a piece just to speak on the liminal and the way we're utilising our cultural indication species as a way of threading a more regenerative world. Urban, I don't know whether our frontline crew can see you or just wanted to open up space there, Deadly. Deadly being good, not dangerous.
Thanks for that, JD. I'm actually in the back just listening in and learning. But I feel so honored to be part of this conversation and to hear so many of the threads that are weaving together from different conversations. Including from the conversations that we had yesterday around nonviolence and peaceful futures. There's really so much that comes together, and that just confirms for me over and over what we've said here so very many times, that everything is interconnected, that we are a shared and a collective intelligence, and that when we relate in these particular ways, we leave space for imagination to flourish and for so much more to come up than what we think we have. And that these conversations and taking the time to be in them is what helps us to build that wisdom and to share that knowledge and just to be a species that is a lot more in tune with itself and with all of the other species around us who are also our teachers and our mentors in a lot of ways. So that's what I'm hearing, and I feel that comes back to all of those liminal spaces. It's all of those spaces in between that we're taking the time to inhabit. Thanks, JD.
Deadly, thanks. I wanted to roll off that what you're sharing there about the liminal and just weaving a piece too around. If we're going to be utilising Indigenous knowledges in Muki's field, my field, everyone mine, field about the way we work with and alongside our people. It's so important that tuning in and that listening, that there's a notion of respect for the bowl. The bowl, I say bowl, and I put an invitation to Mob Online, and please, Steph and Ed, put it out to whoever's out in the worldwide YouTube. But definitely an open invitation to come to country, come to Bunya Bunya. It's better to sit on country and listen and be Bianga on that space, which is a part of a very long thread. I'm wearing my singing shirt too. We wear the rainbow snake, which is a very old story, as Steph would know, which connects our people, our freshwater people, specifically about the fresh. Australia is a very harsh continent. It's a desert island. So our people are some of the most smartest people in the world about land conservation and also about bringing people together. When the British, and I know I've got a few colleagues here from England, when the British came over, and we called them Miglu, it's also the name of a deadly whale now, which hovers the east coast. That's a nice way of bringing non-Indigenous names back in. But when we get together, that track, that rainbow snake track, is such an important part of giving and living on this land. And what that taught our people was the way we come together and share. And that's the Wunju, that's the share exchange, is such an important part of the pattern. So on that pattern, I just wanted to share this too. When we're utilising our systems, because our systems thinking we utilise in partnership for deadly organisations like AIME and the IMAG-NATION Uni, which is an amazing piece and to be at the factory. It's amazing to be in space and see. And we've got a particular project piece we're doing together around the unlikely 5 connections and things like that. We also have a process around bowls, the circles. Our ceremonial circles on country can actually be dated back to that 50,000 year time period. So there's actually stone circles instead all around country, from Steph's country to my country, from the east coast to the west coast. That's why the bowl, that's why the circle is such an important pattern. And then we worked out ways to make sure that bowl, and I think my African brothers and sisters talk about their circle processes too around Ubuntu, if I'm getting that language weave right. But our bowl is a very specific way of doing business. So there's, in that, I'd just like to share the bullet, which is open, what can be shared, yarned here. So it's an open plain circle for us, or the doer, the stone circles, which are closed. So there's going to be knowledges which, as Muki would attest to, that, well, that's something that the particular tribe people don't want to share on that particular piece. So that's why this new project we're working on, there's going to be a bullet, there's going to be a clear indication on what is open knowledges. And that's a really important piece, because as well as being the most research people in the world, my people, and a challenge for Indigenous people around the world, our intellectual property has been taken, has been stolen, our imaginative thinking, our tracking on country, and then not shared back in a regular rhythm. Not shared back in a regular rhythm at all. That's why, as a polity in Australia, Steph can attest to this, we're now working in circle to get our voice, our treaty, our truth, where a lot of first world nations, a lot more economic developed nations have already got those treaty rights. So the bullet and the doer are really important concepts to really tune into. And on that, I'd just like to finish with the bridge piece, which is definitely what I see imagination working. We're working on a bridge piece around what's called the cultural indication species. And that's a great piece, because what it is for us, it's about tuning into the opportunity of what's a better way of investing in, say, finance that isn't about taking from land development, taking from country, but is more about giving, is more about that pattern. For us, our pattern, the rainbow snake pattern, or there would be the eel pattern, or the humpback whale pattern, is about particular cultural indicative species which show the strength on country and the way country should be looked after. And unfortunately, over the years, with different ways of working and being on our country in Australia specifically, and all over the world, those cultural indicators have been not heard, and those species haven't been loved and looked after. And that's an important piece to get back into relating. So not just with ourselves, stopping and slowing, but also, like I'm hearing my colleagues talk about as well, with our species, with our land. So I've shared a few links there too around the way we're looking at working in that in the collab space, sharing and thinking those ideas. It's a beautiful piece too with our old ways of yarning that we're also being challenged in Deakin to help share those in space. That's an amazing piece where your imagination can take you. Where an old dreaming yarn that Steph and I share back is a way of people who go up to space can release and feel better about that experience up there. And the only way they can do that, be younger, to slow down, is through an old yarning method that comes back to us. But what we have to be as labbers is really specific about what it can be shared and what is open and what it cannot, what stays with mob and is their intellectual property. Go, continues.
Yeah, thanks for that, John. I think that's a important piece of, yes, open sharing knowledge, but like from what I understand with different kind of access to it with like traditional, or I don't even want to say traditional, but with like our way, you don't get access to all knowledge at once. You kind of level up. So you have different, the word's escaping me at the moment, protocols that you go through in order to access different types of knowledge. And when I was hanging out with Tyson in New York last May, I kind of had this thought kind of spiral around that, in the internet space, or where we are now, there's so much knowledge coming through, and a lot of it is just out of context. It's not relevant. We're watching, people's cats for hours and hours. It doesn't have anywhere to go. But also, like, a more kind of important thing is that there's knowledge for people to create algorithms. There's genetic modifying CRISPR like technology that people have access to. And it's not probably, like, in some cases, like, what happens if this falls into the wrong hands, where people don't understand the outcome of what's going to happen if they put this knowledge into action as well. So I think, yeah, that's a really important piece to call out as well. So I would like to just open the floor as well and give back some of my, before we run out of time today, just kind of give back some of my reflections on a few threads that have been coming through. And one of them is our energy, you know, like what is that network and where are we putting it? Are we watching cats for hours on end where that's not giving us any, I guess that's the wisdom, right? We're not getting that wisdom. And Illa, something that you mentioned right at the beginning was that feeling, like sometimes it can't be written. It's not something that is communicated through words. It's a feeling that you get when you're getting that knowledge, and that's coming because it's in relation to people and you're having that emotional connection as well. And yeah, if we have networks that are sick and need to be repatterned, we can do that through relational networks, not only with each other, but everything around us. And it's got to take us time to slow down, and we, I guess, get to determine what time is as well. And yeah, learn from everything around us and connect that to give network so it's more circular and not just that one way of knowledge going one way. Yeah, happy to open it up to the floor to give some reflections of what you've kind of seen come through today.
Yeah, I wanted to throw a shape in, and that there's been a lot about the circle, which is a shape that I love and I work with a lot. And yeah, just I think is a beautiful, eternal shape. And at Youth by Youth, we work a lot with the spiral, and things are cyclical, they're repeated, they're reciprocal was a big part of what I heard in what John just shared, that there was this piece about like reclamation, which feels like too small a word. It's like the English language is too small a language sometimes to comprehend the grandeur and beauty of the world. I would say often, actually. And that there's also this piece about reciprocity. And that's something that I'm personally holding in my life. And I know as an organization, we are too. But yeah, that at Youth by Youth, we really work with the spiral, and we work with like these things that we call global action circles. And the process in that is our pedagogy of what is, what if, what now. So all action is based on an understanding of how did we get here? Where are we? And then, okay, I'm sitting with that. I'm spending time really, yeah, being with that for me and for the world, recognizing that I am the world and the world is me. I am in and of the world. What can I imagine? What can I tune into? What's my deepest longing? What's my vision? And then, only then do we act. And action always comes from imagination. That for us, those two are inextricably linked. And it's not about action for the sake of action. It's not about solving problems for the sake of solving problems. It's about doing it, but doing it in service of our fellow beings. We're doing it because we're world making. And I think that everybody has the ability to world make. And we've not forgotten it. We've been told that we can't. And there's something really powerful, I think, in reclaiming that back and saying, no, I can. I might be 11, I might be 9, I might be 50 or 70, and I can world make. And I can world make with my local, place-based, traditional, ancestral knowledge. I can weave the multiplicities of what I am as a being and create a world that represents that. And that's sort of what we try to do with the spiral. So we do that, we act, and then we go back and we return and we keep going. And there is no end point, because the end is the journey.
Thanks so much, Ida, for sharing your wisdom, and wondering, just for a round of quick closing reactions before we finish off, Muki, maybe something that you want to take with you from this conversation to close off would be great.
Yeah, it is to continue. For me, it will be to continue and think about how those imaginations, and especially from alternative forms of knowledge and different systems of knowledge, are continue to integrate with scientific approach. It's not an easy marriage, and it's continued to be a dialogue. But you need to continue thinking about it if you want to make progress in this area.
Thanks so much. Pearl, closing thought for you, that something you want to take from the conversation?
I think there's so much to take from what everyone has said throughout this hour. And I think what I enjoyed a lot was listening to John speak about all of this Indigenous relation, which I knew a surface level about, but actually it allowed me to think on a deeper level as well. And I think that it's really important that not only the newer generations, but the existing generations right now sort of promote futures literacy. Because in terms of imagination, what I like to do is split the term dead center, and it's giving you image and nation. And if you look at the first part, you think about photography jargon, so picture, capture, right? And then your nation is where you are, your country. And it can be a global state as well. But how are you imagining the future of your nation? Where do you see your communities? Where would you want society to be? How do you see yourself a part of that society? What needs to be done in order to get there? And we're not just talking about idealism here, because the whole point of future literacy is basically taking in something that doesn't necessarily exist, but working to develop that from now. So I think that going back to what Ela was also saying about the way of how our education system operates today, where it only focuses on like cognitive abilities, I think that for the future generations to also implement a state of change, they need to work at attaining the 5 minds of the future. So the disciplined mind, the synthesizing mind, the creative mind, the intuitive mind, etc. But also focusing on the intuitive mind to produce clarifying insights, unique solutions, and work. Because I feel that when that is done, you get a kaleidoscope of new possibilities and transformative change by using that set of creative intelligence that is involved.
John, do you want to close off on your thoughts? Thanks so much.
Oh, Gumba Nindu's there. It's lovely wrap up, Pearl. And Ila, you set that circle with the spiral. I just was writing down, I wrote pattern on the side. That was a lovely way to finish too, about mapping that. I know that Steph, the lab calls on Steph to give her images and such. She's got a great mapping mind of the patterns. I just wanted to share, like I said, it was a lovely space and to come together, Jan. Education's in safe hands with great thinkers and doers that we have online here. Better minds than this little black duck on the other side of Australia. Nah, it's good, remember? But I would sing out the tangible and intangible, and with imagination. And I'll roll off what colleagues singing about the smoke. And that's when it comes to when we imagine, we imaginate and want to create, there's always going to be a tangible. And on country, we talk about that around fire and water. So the tangible is very much those elemental things. The intangibles, the smoke which comes from that. But in Australia, very specifically, there's a particular burning technique that we make sure we do called the cool burns. Jamanyanyong, that's what's in that poem there, Jamanyanyong. And that cool burn requires the wet ground to light, and there's a specific time and season to do that. So that balance between the intangible and tangible, like you're not always going to have everything at the fingertips, but it's that ability to look through that smoke pattern and you see that smoke, I'm going to follow that. I'm going to follow that energy and go that way because it's good smoke. And when you burn that fire and that water ground together, that is good smoke because that's the smoke, that's a good smoke, the great smoke for country. Yo, come and Indus, everyone.
On that, I think we close. Thanks so much to you, John, Pearl, Muki, Ida, Steph for co-partnering on this journey of this past hour. It's been an absolute pleasure doing this with you. Angus as well, and the production team from AIME in the background who are doing amazing work, just always giving space to show this content, share it with the world. Join us again tomorrow. We've got a conversation again tomorrow at 9 CET, 8, I think, Australia time, looking at imagination in every classroom. And that will be one of our ways of closing off this crazy week that's been the festival. Steph, any closing words? Gratitude to you.
Yeah, would love to see a world where imagination's highlighted or placed at the top of the priorities in every classroom. That would be incredible. And thanks to everyone for joining us and going into all of these wonderful spaces with imagination. Thank you.